Welcome everyone, and thank you for all of you who are able to join us for this special live broadcast. My name is Marche Simpson, and I'm the Director of Diversity and Inclusion for Alumni Engagement. I currently reside in Atlanta, Georgia, but was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. Emory has been working diligently on listening to our constituents in our many communities over the last year to create content and programming that brings individuals together and provides a feeling of support and inclusion. If you have any ideas or thoughts for future programming, please feel free to reach out to me directly. This presentation is part of an ongoing digital learning program sponsored by the Office of Alumni and Constituent Engagement. As our world is becoming increasingly digital, we're focusing efforts on bringing lifelong learning to a variety of digital platforms to meet the needs of our alumni, students, parents, leaders, donors, and friends. Two pieces of housekeeping and note. This presentation is being recorded and will be sent later on today to everyone who registered. Second, please type your questions in the question section of the platform, and we'll get to as many as possible following the presentation. Today, we are hosting the last event in a month-long series celebrating the Asian American and Pacific Islander heritage community within Emory. May is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and we are proud to celebrate the cultural influence these people have on the Emory community. Today, more than ever, we feel the strength and unity of a diverse body as we navigate the COVID-19 pandemic. Our discussion today will be moderated by Carol So, a 2010 Emory College alumna who currently serves as Senior Director of Alumni and Constituent Engagement Programs in Emory's Division of Advancement and Alumni Engagement. In this role, she oversees the strategic direction of signature programs, fostering meaningful engagement through lifelong learning, academic experiences, volunteer service, leadership, community building, career development, mentorship, and student development initiatives. Carol also co-chairs Emory's AAE's Asian and Pacific Islander Employee Resource Group. With that, I will hand it over to Carol to introduce our guests. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Marche, for that introduction. And hello, everyone. As Marche mentioned, my name is Carol So. I currently serve as Senior Director of Alumni and Constituent Programs in the Advancement and Alumni Engagement Division at Emory. And I'm very, very thrilled to be here with you today. I actually recently celebrated my 10-year anniversary at Emory. So in addition to being an undergraduate student here, I was just reflecting on all of the wonderful experiences that I had as a student with community members here and resources that really helped shape what we're going to be talking about today, our own narratives and the networking community that I've built in the AAPI community. So thank you to all of our panelists for joining us. I'm actually going to ask each person to introduce yourselves for a brief minute or two, and also share any other details as it relates to your involvements, experiences, and or background and intersections with today's topic. So if we can start off with Sam, that would be great.
Hi everyone, my name is Sam Choi. I am a partner at the law firm of King & Spalding based in Atlanta, Georgia. Practiced in the area employee benefits and executive compensation. I'm actually a double Emory. I graduated from the college in 1988 and received my Master of Laws and Tax degree at the Emory Law School in 1993. For those of you who still remember the Emory campus, you'll probably remember there was a high school right adjacent to Emory called Jewett Hills High School. That's where I graduated from, and so I didn't move very far. I am ethnically Korean American. I was born in Korea, came to the United States when I was 7 years old. I've been in Atlanta now for about 40 years, so I consider Atlanta my home.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sam. Jane, do you want to go next?
Hi, everybody. I'm Jane Yang. I am a psychologist, and I'm the Associate Director of Outreach Services at Emory's Counseling and Psychological Services. I just realized I am coming up on my 15th year at Emory as an employee. I graduated from the college in 1998. Similar to Sam, I am a Georgian. You don't meet many of us anymore, but I was born in rural Georgia. I briefly left Georgia to get to graduate school in Southern California and then returned back home. And really, my goal in returning home was working with the AAPI community here in Atlanta.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jane. Michael, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, Michael Wu. I'm the Chief Legal Officer of Madewell, which is based in New York, but I live in Atlanta. Prior to joining Madewell last year, I was General Counsel of Carter's and Oshkosh, based here in Buckhead, and I've also served as General Counsel of 2 other public companies. Sam and I met first week of freshman year when I cut in front of him in a very long line for drop out at Whitehall. And I saw one of the only other Asian Americans around campus. We were probably about 1% or less Asian Americans back in the day. And he was nice enough to let me cut in front of him. And I mentioned that I was in his calculus class, and we were probably the only 2 Asian American kids in the whole calculus class. So he was nice enough to let me cut in front of him. So that's how we met way back in the day. I'm of Chinese descent. I was born in New York City, but my parents immigrated to the U.S. in the early 60s for graduate school.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michael. And last but not least, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Lee. I graduated from Emory College in 2010 with a double major in English and International Studies. I was editor of the Emory Wheel because I love news and I was interested in going into journalism. And I am now a reporter at the Washington Post. I'm on the political accountability and enterprise team, which basically means, investigating pieces. I cover money in politics as well as influence in politics. Before coming to the Washington Post, I was a government accountability reporter at the Arizona Republic in Phoenix, where I went out for a summer job after graduating from Emory almost exactly 10 years ago, and then was hired on after my summer gig there. I was involved very heavily with the Wheel, obviously, when I was at Emory, but also with more mentorship, which was a multi-cultural mentorship program, mentoring younger students, which was something that I was always involved in, and helping make sure that there's greater diversity and connection within the diverse students on campus. I was born in Seoul, South Korea, and my family and I immigrated to Guam when I was young, when I was about 7. So I grew up in Guam until I graduated high school and went to college. So I traveled literally halfway around the world to go to Emory, and my family still lives in Guam. And I remember the first year when I was a freshman in Guam, they added Guam as a list of places where students are from, or the freshman class was from, and I was the only one from Guam, so I knew that I had put Guam on the map for that class, and I was really happy to see that. And actually, since then, there have been a lot of Guamanians who have come and gone from Emory, which is really great.
That's great. Guamanians, I love it. And one more thing I forgot to mention here is that Michelle and I are also classmates. So we have 2 sets of classmates here. We're joking, sort of a mini reunion before we started the cult, but it's great to see you, Michelle. And I know that while we were at Emory, we actually seem to have a little bit of a spike in the Asian American population. I think that's kind of when we had an influx in that period, 2008 to 2012 or so. So it's great to kind of be continuing these conversations down the road. I'm going to go ahead and kick us off here with our first question, and I certainly want to keep this open-ended so folks can chime in after one person speaks pretty fluidly. Can you share some specific characteristics or aspects of your identity, your heritage, or community that are unique and that you really relate to? And I'll have Michelle kick this off for us.
Sure. As I mentioned, I was born in Korea and raised in Guam, and Guam itself is a population of about 170,000 people. So there are very few of us to begin with who are from Guam, let alone immigrants who went from Asia to Guam. Guam is very much considered like a, in-between place like a soft landing for Asian immigrants because it's so close to Asia, but it's also American territory. And, you know, having grown up there while traveling to Asia throughout my childhood and also coming out to the States, I really came to realize that I developed a very unique backstory that positions me to be a bridge between both Asian and American cultures. My parents come from both North Korean and South Korean roots. And so having come from both sides of the Korean Peninsula, as well as Guam, which is an American territory, I just, you know, coming to the stateside, I came to realize that I have a very unique perspective as coming from many different outskirts of the Asian American experience. It's something that really took me a long time to figure out what the voice I have is, whether it matters, and to realize that it does matter and how to use it in the best way possible. And, you know, I've been able to pursue specific stories that no other colleagues have been able to tell because of this unique background that I have at the right moment. And it's taken me many years to realize what those moments are, but it's been really rewarding to be able to be on that journey and figure it out and turn it into a professional advantage in my line of work. When I got to Emory, you know, I really wanted to, as I said, become a journalist, but wanted to find a shared community in pursuing journalism because I was so far away from home. I didn't know at all how to enter journalism. And one of the first things I did as a freshman in Complex Dorm was to Google Asian American and journalists. And I found the Asian American Journalists Association. And I joined that as a freshman at Emory, and I got to learn the Atlanta chapter there. And now I'm the president of the Asian American Journalists Association because it's been such a big part of who I am and the professional network that I built at Emory and in Atlanta at the beginning of, you know, my student career. So I do think that I have a very unique background, and whenever I come across another soul-born Korean who grew up in Guam, I'm like, oh my gosh, there are two of us, there are a couple more of us.
Thanks, Michelle. Sam, let me turn that question over to you. Are there specific attributes about your identity or heritage that you especially resonate with?
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, I was born in Korea and came to the United States with my family when I was 7 years old. But my family has actually been in the United States since 1900. My great-grandfather immigrated with his family, including my grandfather, to Hawaii in 1900. And the way we ended up back in Korea, my side of the family, is that once my grandfather graduated from college here in the United States in the 1920s, he went back to Korea to work, and that's where he had his, he got married and had kids, including my father. So we sort of been ping-ponging back and forth between Korea and the United States as a family for more than 100 years now. But despite those deep roots, I think it's interesting that, you know, as Asian Americans, we're seen as recent immigrants, no matter how deep our roots are here in the United States. And this is something, you know, the reality is something that we deal with on a regular basis. The other thing that's a little unique is, if you grow up in Atlanta now, there's such a large Asian American community that you can associate as much or as little as you want with other Asians. But growing up here in the United States, I grew up in relatively small communities where literally myself and my brother were like only Asians in school. And when I moved to Atlanta with my family in '82, there were virtually no Asian Americans in Atlanta. It's hard to believe, but believe it or not, there was literally one Asian American grocery store in Atlanta, and it was run out of somebody's house. Half of it was a grocery store and half of it was their house. And you fast forward to now, and how big the Asian American community has gotten in Atlanta. It's just an exponential change here in Atlanta in the Southeast. But growing up in a small community was sort of there's some pros and cons. Obviously, you learn to associate with other people that are non-Asian because you have to. But at the same time, I think your feeling of isolation because you are the Asian is a little bit greater than if you're in a community with other Asians. So, you know, no perfect situation, but, you know, try to take the best away from the situation that you're dealt.
Absolutely. And Michael, what about you? Are there special characteristics that you can speak to?
I certainly think so. I have an interesting story because my parents escaped China with the Communist Revolution. So my mother came from a very rich family, a landlord's family outside Wuhan, China. And they used to own thousands of acres of land. They had 3 mansions that were connected to each other. And 2 of her uncles, one was a KMT general and one was a politician with the KMT, decided that she was the smartest of the young children to help them escape. So they took her as a 7-year-old as their disguise. They posed as her servants and took her from her family and moved to Hong Kong as refugees in 1948. Unfortunately, they didn't have a proper paperwork to show they were related to her, so they moved on to Taiwan, where the KMT congregated, and she was left homeless and penniless in Hong Kong. So, you know, she has a very moving story. I've given speeches to various Asian American bar associations about Helena Wu being the American success story, from homeless and penniless in Hong Kong to a successful engineer here in the US. And before she retired from the IRS, she ran facilities and had hundreds of people working in her group. So as a kid, I was also similar to Sam's experience, one of the few minority kids in lily white neighborhoods in East Brunswick, New Jersey, Knoxville, Tennessee. The only respite was when I moved to Seoul, South Korea, to a military base with my parents. And then I felt like, you know, I was in the majority, but then we moved back to Dunwoody, Georgia. And at that time in the early 80s, I was one of 2 Asian American kids in high school there, in middle of 8th grade. The other was a Korean exchange student. And I was harassed every single day of 8th grade. But every time I would complain to my parents, my mom would tell me about her story, being 7 years old and homeless. So she just told me to take care of business. Fortunately, I was a black belt from Korea, so I got in multiple fights as the advisor had told me to do so back then. It was a very different environment, and then people left me alone after that.
Yes, a lot has changed over the years, hasn't it?
Yes.
I'm going to actually pivot slightly and toss this one over to Jane. Jane, can you describe a time or pivotal experience that influenced how you define your own narrative?
You know, as everyone else is talking, there's so much that really resonates for me. I, was born and raised in rural Georgia, and when my family moved to Duluth, Georgia, right before I started high school, I thought I was moving to the big city, right? And so much of my experience, first of all, with other Asians, period, was really through church. My family's Korean, and so we went to a Korean American church. And other than that, really my primary sort of communities of affinity were other minority students, other minority children. And so a lot of my experience was shaped really powerfully at 2 different times. One was when I started at Emory, and I was exposed for the first time to a very broad, or much broader community of Asian Americans than I had ever been in my life. So other Asians from other ethnic groups. And realizing in that moment, while I had this strong identity as a Korean American, I did not necessarily have a strong identity as an Asian American. And being at Emory really made me so much more aware of that and of the importance of allyship and coalition building. And at that time, I remember one of my friends who was a couple years older than me. His name is Chen. Stephen approached me. There was a group at that time called the Students in Alliance for Asian American Concerns. That group is now the Asian Student Organization. And Stephen asked me if I would be the president of this group, which was really, at that time, they were calling the moderator. And I just remember thinking at that time, like, I know nothing about what it really means to be Asian American. And yet I knew everything through my own lived experience, right? So part of the way that my narrative was really me sort of owning my own story and learning how to be unapologetic about that, even as I realized how much I needed to learn about other members of the Asian sort of broad community.
Can I just tag on to that as well after Jane? Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Michael. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with Jane in terms of the allyship and really working with other groups. So at Emory, for example, when it was about 1% Asian when we were there, I never really had any African-American friends or Hispanic friends. My fraternity, Chi Phi, I think I was the only Asian kid for a few years before we had another Korean-American brother join. And the summer of 1987, I had an internship in public policy for minority students at UC Berkeley. And it was 1/3 African-American, 1/3 Hispanic American, 1/3 Asian American. And as part of this public policy program, we all had to give speeches about the Chinese American experience, for example, African American experience. I learned so much, and I had one African American roommate, one Hispanic roommate, and I would never have had that experience at Emory back in the day because I felt I was segregated with just really white friends back in the day at my fraternity. And I think that was the most eye-opening experience of my lifetime. I didn't realize, one of my friends in that program was African-American from a affluent family. He was at Harvard, the other was from Yale. And then they were telling me about all the harassment they received from police. I would never have had that experience of getting to know these folks, at Emory, for example, back then. And so, I think it's so important. That was one of the seminal experiences in my life. And then they didn't know about the Chinese Exclusionary Act. And that was, what I presented for my presentation. And they were shocked that Chinese were excluded from the US for 50 plus years by law.
Absolutely. Jane, do you want to continue?
Well, I really appreciate what Michael's sharing just in terms of the experience of learning and how relationships help build learning. The other piece that I was going to share was really about when I went to Southern California for graduate school. And, being exposed to more Asian Americans at Emory was one thing. Moving to Southern California was a totally different story, right? And again, what became very salient to me was a few things. One was in terms of my narrative up to that point, what I had become aware of was that growing up with parents who were immigrants really instilled in me a very strong value around perseverance. The other thing that it instilled in me was really thinking about the collective and my needs really being secondary to those of my team or those of my community. And then the third thing was a value around accommodation. And I think for my particular family, where the accommodation was very salient was because we grew up in such a rural area and there were issues around physical safety, really thinking about the importance and really being instilled in me that it was important for me to accommodate even when I didn't want to in order to remain safe. And for me, those were just parts of me that in some ways I had not been as connected to. And the way that ended up playing out in my work life was I was working hard and then thinking about what I wanted to do next. And I felt like there was no job out there that really fit me without me having to accommodate to a degree that I realized I would be very unhappy. And at this time, I was in my final year of training to become a psychologist, and my supervisor happened to be a Chinese woman named Edith. And Edith and I were talking about this, and I was full of angst, and she just looked at me and she said, Jane, you're talking about all these ways you're going to have to accommodate. What would it be like for you to really think about what you love and to find the job that you love that will fit you? And it was the first time in my life that I had had an adult figure who I respected talk to me about really listening to my passions and that it was okay to do that. And I didn't have to necessarily accommodate or put myself second in that process. And that was an extraordinary moment for me and will always stay with me.
Absolutely. And Jane, you're alluding to this a lot in what you were just saying, but a lot of this is about self-discovery, right? And it's milestones. So how can understanding both our shared experiences as well as unique milestones, kind of individualistic characteristics in our self-discovery journeys affect our personal and our professional development. I'm gonna come back around to Michelle here for this one.
Sure, and I can relate so much to what Jane was just talking about too, because understanding my place as, you know, coming from an immigrant family and in the world of both immigrants and non-immigrants, and understanding that and figuring out where my place is has been such a big part of my personal and professional journey. You know, I think back to a specific leadership training I went through through the executive leadership program at the Asian American Journalists Association. It's very much training journalists to take that next step in their newsrooms and news organizations, but also coming to terms with who they are and what their heritage and background is and how that affects your professional life. And that was the first time I realized that there are a lot of really valuable and great characteristics that I carried from my parents and our immigrant experience as a first-generation immigrant. And a lot of things about my upbringing at home that I value, like respecting your elders, working really hard and letting your work shine for you, keeping your head down and just, you know, doing the grind, and staying humble and staying hungry. All of those things, as well as assimilating to those around you and the surroundings around you, those are things that I really grew up with and very much value. But then it was through this leadership training that I realized that it also is very much at odds with the characteristics of what you would think a successful journalist is. You have to be out there, you have to be super aggressive, you have to keep challenging authority, you have to stand out, and there's a big pressure to brand yourself as a journalist nowadays, especially online. Tout your own work, you know, give yourself the kudos and credit and take what you are not being given by others. And it really, I was so uncomfortable with those two professional needs and the personal values that I have that coming at odds, and I really had to figure out, okay, what am I comfortable with, who am I and who do I want to be, and what kind of journalist do I want to be? How do I forge my path as a professional while being true to my personal background and appreciating what my parents taught me and what our immigrant experience taught me, but also using it to my advantage. And I came to realize that I'm really good at accommodating, I'm really good at assimilating, and there are good and bad things about that in terms of being a reporter. You know, I can pretty much talk to anybody because I can assimilate myself into whatever your background is, wherever you come from, and trying to relate to you and understanding how I'm different from you and how I can be more like you. But I also had to realize, you know, that can also erase who I am in the newsroom, because I'm kind of shape-shifting myself to everyone else and all of my stories and not really being true to who I am. And it really, one of the things I also struggled with was that I wanted to be a good and thorough investigative reporter. But a lot of things about me, you know, I don't really speak until I think I really need to speak and want to speak and will be heard. And those are not always the things that make you look good as an investigative journalist. You could look like a pushover. So I had to really come to terms with that. And, you know, it took me a long time to realize that, no, there are a lot of strengths about me and who I am and how I was raised. And that there is a value of the way that I was brought up and my personal experience, and that I could turn these things into a successful journalism career and stand out in my own way, and to appreciate the strength of my unique experience, but to also, you know, push myself to use it to my advantage. And nowadays I'm a lot better at giving myself credit publicly, and I'm a lot better at speaking up in ways that I'm not always comfortable with, but I know that I should. And sometimes it's taken myself to understand that and push myself out of the comfort zone, but also stay true to who I am. And it's a constant struggle, I think still, but I think recognizing that has been a huge eye-opening experience for me.
That's great. Thanks, Michelle. Can anyone else speak to some of these kind of dichotomies that we face as Asian Americans, things that we may have been brought up and raised, cultural values versus what is expected in your work or in environments outside of our home, and kind of how we were nurtured? Can anyone else speak to how you have kind of navigated through juggling those dichotomies.
Well, I just want to add on to what Jane and Michelle have said. I mean, I think, the collective being so important in Asian American societies, accommodation, that resonates with me because, for example, my parents always pushed me to be a doctor or an engineer. They didn't know any better. They didn't realize that lawyers can do very well or other professions, but they just thought that, they wanted me to have a safe profession. So I entered Emory, even though I hated calculus, I hated physics, I hated chemistry, and I was declared myself as pre-med. And I was miserable my freshman year just because, my mom was always, you need to persevere, you need to do this, you need to, and so, they pushed me a lot. And then when I went back that summer to Saudi Arabia, where we were living at the time, I was just thinking I was miserable my freshman year, and I was volunteering at a Grady Memorial Hospital surgical emergency clinic, and I hated every minute of it. And then when I got back to Emory, I just decided that in drop out, I think, it was in drop out, I just dropped all my science and math classes and started taking political science and other, liberal arts classes. And, I think for me, that was a turning point in my self-discovery, that I just didn't want to do what my parents were telling me to do because I was very unhappy and I wasn't doing that well. So.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as Michael. I started as a pre-med at Emory, but I think it took me a little bit longer, probably a little bit more stubborn than Michael is, to realize I did not want to pursue medicine as a career. And the turning point was volunteering at a local hospital as a phlebotomist, person that goes around drawing blood. And I also worked at the dental school lab when Emory had a dental school. And those two experiences basically taught me that this was not the career choice for me. So in my junior year, I made a shift to basically pursue law. So I think in terms of the biggest, aha moments, and I've been reaffirmed throughout my life, starting at a younger age, is, my father, actually both of my parents, I think I was probably in the third grade or so, and I suspect that a lot of you and a lot of other minority kids get this talk as well, is, the talk along the lines of, hey, you're a member of a minority group, you're Asian. Because of that, you're going to be treated differently in some cases. People make fun of you. You may need to do more work or work harder to get the same recognition other people get for doing less work. But at the same time, you got to pick your fight. You can't spend the whole day trying to make a mountain out of every molehill. You got to be practical. So that has taught me throughout my academic and professional career that you have to be practical. I mean, you don't want to stick your head in the sand, but at the same time, you can't fight everything. Otherwise, you're going to drive yourself crazy mentally, physically. You're not going to do well professionally. You're not going to be good for your family. So I think at the end of the day, you got to be practical. And the other thing that's really helped me out throughout my career is that I actually had a number of good mentors, a lot of good friends who are also, some are Asian American, some are not, that I can actually call. And usually not in the same firm or the company I'm in. You just talk through the issues. They may be in a different career or similar career and say, hey, how do you do this issue? Just walk me off the cliff, so to speak. And they share their experiences, and you sort of realize, hey, this is a shared experience. I'm not the only one going through this. And it's not necessarily an Asian American centric issue of African American, Hispanics. Other minority groups have very similar issues. So I think when you talk to them, you realize that you're not the only one going through the experience. And that sense actually just sort of makes the day-to-day dealing a little bit easier. Not that it necessarily changes anything, but you realize that you're not alone in that journey. So I think to the extent that anyone doesn't have a person or mentor that they can talk to, they should seek one out. They shouldn't wait for somebody to reach out to them. And a lot of the best mentor relationships I've had have been people with younger than myself, my peer group, older. A lot of them are just organic. It's not so much, hey, you want to be my mentor? It's sort of, hey, let's discuss sort of career aspirations. How do I deal with this politically, at the firm? Or what do you think about me moving to this firm for this opportunity? You got to have those confidants and those relationships. I think that really helps along the way, regardless of what profession you may be in.
I think another issue you have to really counteract is the stereotypes of, Asian Americans being the really smart brainiac you lock in the back of the room, right? And I was working for a public company in the past, and I had a coach who told me, Michael, you know a lot, But I think the feedback from some of your colleagues is that you're not contributing enough in the group meetings because you're always listening to what others are saying. And so I think one thing you've really, despite what, cultural learnings we've had in growing up, being Asian American, and your parents telling you, you need to be obedient, you need to listen, you need to not talk, you need to be seen, not heard. You need to, when you're in the American society, it's not right for you to just say, I know very little and actually know quite a bit. Whereas, a lot of Americans, they know very little and they seem like the way they talk about themselves, they know everything under the sun. So you need to do sort of the opposite of how you were trained as a child and really just go out there, put it out there, speak first, and not just wait for everyone else to have spoken before you try to add value to the conversation or meeting.
Well, I think the other piece too has to do with what it means to be part of a team in different environments. So the other piece I think about for me was the moment that I realized that my work environment was not my family environment. So, in a lot of Asian families, when people in the family need something, there's not necessarily a need to communicate that. Like, people sort of know, and then you chip in and you sort of do it quietly. And I realized that I was bringing a lot of that to the workplace, where I was just chipping in and doing it quietly. But then I was, in some ways, also had developed this expectation that people would do that for me. And I was burnt out, right? Because and then I realized, wow, like this is what's happening. And so really getting in a space where I had to start asking myself, am I doing something for other people that they can do for themselves? And also being okay with asking myself, is there something I need help with? And then who can I ask for that help? Because I do also think a really strong value in many Asian communities is that of saving face and also suffering in silence, right? So there's this expectation that life is pain, and that if you just power through it, you're going to make it. But there are times, especially in the workplace, where you need to, as Sam has discussed, reach out to mentors, reach out to colleagues, people you trust, to get some input and to get some help.
There's a Chinese saying my mom always
I think, one of the hardest things for Asian Americans to do is to talk about themselves in a positive way, to take credit for work they're doing or contributions they make to their team. But in the environment culture that we live in the United States, that's part of the game. That's how you get promoted. That's how you get recognized. And so I think that's one of the hardest obstacles, especially for first, second generation immigrants to overcome, because your whole life you've been told not to do that. But then you realize that you get into a professional environment, you have to do that. That's across the board. So not in not an antagonizing way, but self-promotion is one of those things you got to learn how to do in a tactful way. You got to be aggressive in taking credit. You got to be aggressive in taking opportunities.
Yeah, and I don't know if you guys also experience this in your profession. By the way, I feel like so seen just hearing everyone talk, because I could totally connect with what everyone's saying. One of the things that I've experienced that, that I had to come to terms with was the fear of being pigeonholed into the Asian in the workplace. I don't know if you guys have experienced that, but, at first I had worried, what if I'm too Asian? And what if people only saw me as Asian and nothing else? And if I kept pitching stories affecting the AAPI community, does that make me the Asian reporter? And does that, limit professional opportunities for me? And then I had to kind of think through and realize, like, what's so wrong with being seen as the Asian, as long as, I'm also showing the rest of my skills and the rest of my reporting and story pitching abilities. Why not take care of my community and bring that voice to the table? But really, the fear of being pigeonholed held me back for a really long time.
All right, that's a good point. And, a good friend of mine, he's the general counsel of Target, Fortune 50 company, Don Liu. And he's a 5'5", 120-pound Korean American guy. And, he has always felt that he has had to counteract the perception of being this slight Asian American male in meetings. So, like, whenever he joins a company, he will take people to task just to counteract that stereotype, so they realize, he's a force to be reckoned with. But, I do find that quite interesting, and despite how successful he's been, including former general counsel of Xerox and 2 other Fortune 500 companies, becoming a general counsel of Fortune 500 company, I think at age 38, he's always had that chip on his shoulder. When he goes into the company, you really got to be super aggressive.
And Sam, were you going to say something right before that? No. Great. So that kind of weaves into this next question that I had for the group. Are there other professional challenges in your career related to diversity and inclusion, and you navigated through those challenges? Are there special experiences that kind of stand out to you that you had to overcome in your professional and work environment?
I'll take that one. I'll get it started. I think you have to recognize a lot of people, including Asian Americans, have implicit biases and maybe some prejudices, depending on how they were brought up, whom they were brought up, where they were brought up, what they were taught, how they were taught, and so forth. So I think the recognition is that if you perceive that you're receiving unfavorable bias or prejudice in the workplace, the first assumption can't be it's malicious. A lot of it is basically unintentional. I always use, with younger lawyers, I sometimes talk to them, I always use the example of if you go to a party and you don't know anybody there, and you see two people standing by themselves, and one's Asian American and one is not, who are you more likely to walk up to and talk to, honestly? And I think if you're honest with yourself, it's probably in most cases the Asian American, because you already know that you have some commonality that you can talk to that person about. So with that in mind, I think you have to basically try to do what you can. And it goes to Michelle's standpoint as well about pigeonholing yourself. You got to somehow break that bias. You got to take, you got to take them to lunch. You got to have conversations with them. Tell them that you want the opportunity to work with them. You can't wait for things to change, because we all know that if you do the same thing tomorrow that you did today, the results are probably going to be right. You got to take ownership. You can't rely on other people to do things for you. And so I think as soon as you recognize that if you are responsible, personally accountable, and you take ownership for your career to the extent you can, I think it makes the course a lot easier. Otherwise, it's a very frustrating process to wait for other people to sort of recognize you, to give you opportunities that you think you deserve the opportunities. And we all know that that doesn't usually work. It may happen, but it's a very rare case.
Absolutely. Are there other examples like that, Jane or Michael, that you could speak to in the workplace that you have kind of navigated through?
Well, I think I've normally been the only minority on various executive teams of companies. And so, I think to Sam's point, it's a lot of it's also about building bridges and making sure you get to know your fellow executives and colleagues on a personal level, even though you may not have that much in common. Many times, I think at one company, there were 3 Asian Americans out of 60 or 70 people at the VP level. I was the only one on the leadership team. And so you're always standing out as being a minority, and people can say, make jokes about things that are inappropriate. And so, I think really the way to deal with that, in my experience, is taking people aside and letting them know how you feel about the situation without, I think getting too aggressive about it, but just explaining my background, explaining my experiences and how I thought something was hurtful or, was inappropriate in the context of a meeting. And I've done that many times where I've brought people aside and let them know how I felt about whether it was bashing China or this or, something about President Trump. I've had that discussion where the colleague of mine was not self-aware. They didn't even aware that it had put me off in a certain situation. But I think it's really about building trust and getting to know the colleagues, taking out to lunch, dinner, and other ways to get together with them. And so you build that bridge, and that makes it much easier when you talk to them about a situation that you thought was not very thoughtful.
Jane.
For me, I've been in a few different systems where, especially because my professional content expertise is really in identity development of APITA individuals and their families and the impact of immigration. When I've been asked to join systems, much of the ask has been how to build in service of those communities. And one of the probably the biggest challenges I face is when I've been in a system that really wants to do those things, but doesn't have the inadequate infrastructure to implement those things. And then me feeling so responsible for trying to make things happen, right? In spite of the lack of resource. And so what has been really helpful for me in those times has been to speak with more experienced Asian American professionals in my field, people who are considered trailblazers, and to talk with them about the challenges I'm experiencing, so that they've helped me to sort of separate out like what's a me issue and what's another issue, and not sort of step back from the level of responsibility that I feel. And then also help me to really, as Michael was saying, build a bridge with the systems that I'm in, with the people that I need to in the systems that I'm in, so that people can become more informed. You know, because many times when systems lack infrastructure, it's not because they lack compassion or heart for any sort of endeavor. It's usually a lack of knowledge or a lack of education or a lack of awareness. And so I do think having the guidance of mentors and then figuring out who the people are that I need to build bridges with has been really important.
Absolutely. So, you know, and Sam had alluded to this earlier, but, you know, building bridges, building networks. Are there other ways that Asian Americans can empower themselves and really build solidarity during this really uncertain and difficult time? Obviously, there are exacerbated cultural stereotyping that's happening, microaggressions and racism. So are there other ways that people can really build solidarity and also empower themselves? Michelle, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Sure. And, you know, I want to make a really big pitch for more Asian American professionals to be comfortable with connecting with the media. One of my major challenges, both in the newsroom and outside of the newsroom, is that Asians are not as much, you know, we're still a small percentage of news storytellers, reporters, journalists, editors, news executives, experts, pundits. You know, there's still very much a dearth of Asian Americans in this field. And especially during this time when our face being out there, us telling our stories and connecting with the media to be able to get our stories and experiences out, it's so important to have built those relationships with your local reporters or national reporters, trade publication reporters and editors, just not fearing having that outreach with media. I just want to make a big push for that because, you know, Asian Americans still need to grow their influence in terms of how they're seen and being heard in this country. And that is all that our organization, Asian American Journalists Association, does in terms of getting more Asians into newsrooms as well as being quoted in the media. So I want to make a big push for you know, everyone who is comfortable doing so, to whether, you know, talking off the record with the reporters you are aware of, making that soft touch and asking for coffee. That's the type of stuff we do as reporters all the time, just building our network and building our sources. And if there's any way that AAJ can help you, you know, I'm always pretty reachable in general. I think it's super important for us to be able to harness that power of our story and being able to get out there and comment on our subject matter of expertise, and just put ourselves more out there and go against that, like, you know, blending in and kind of being seen and not heard value that we have been talking about.
Yeah, I think people like Michelle and other Asian American lawyers just have such a, not lawyers, in the press have such a powerful voice. And I just read an article last night about this reporter in Philadelphia who wrote an article about all the negative and assaults, verbal assaults, physical assaults that Asian Americans have been on the receiving end, you know, since this pandemic. And so the article was not only raising awareness, but also about what positive things Asian Americans are doing to change that narrative, whether it's donating PPE to medical workers, donating money to various organizations that are helping those on the front lines. And, it was a terrific story, and it was just highlighting some of this virus of hate that has morphed in America due to this pandemic. And I think it's also it's also important for each of us to be on social media and to highlight different cases, issues. I've been very active on LinkedIn, for example. There was a doctor in Minnesota and one in California, and she put together a video of all these Asian American healthcare providers with signs of different things Asian Americans have been called during the pandemic, and that they were out there in the front lines fighting the pandemic while they've been on the receiving end of discrimination from patients and other people.
Absolutely. And I know we have a few minutes left here. I want to one final question, and I'll ask this of Jane and perhaps Sam. What advice would you share with a student to help them own their own identity and their own story to propel them towards success? Jane, you want to start?
Sure. I think as we've alluded to throughout this session today, something that's really embedded within many of our cultures is shying away from our strengths. And I think it's really important for Asian American people and Asian American young people to know your strengths, to really know them, to embrace them, and also to be aware of your weaknesses without overemphasizing them. So there's this saying, like, sow your strengths and manage your weaknesses. You can't do either of those things unless you know what they are. And I think it's really important to be able to lean into both of them with as I said, with the first, so that you can really leverage your strengths and use your strengths to build bridges with other people in your career. And then in terms of the weaknesses you've got, those are actually also opportunities to build bridges with people, right? Knowing who to ask for help and how, and really using those opportunities to help develop deeper connections.
Great advice. Thank you, Jane. Any final bits there, Sam, that you wanted to add on to that?
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, I think one of the Asian traits a lot of Asians have and that's been taught growing up is that if you do great work and you work hard, you'll be recognized, right? And unfortunately, that's not the way this culture generally works. I think, the best advice I ever received was you got to take ownership of your own career. And that includes doing a lot of things aside from working hard. And the biggest thing probably that a lot of Asians don't do enough of, or that I'm not aware of, they don't network enough. I mean, they need to go out and meet other people, whether it's in their profession or outside their profession, trade associations. They just need to get out more and network, because a lot of these opportunities and what you learn about the marketplace, you don't necessarily get at school or the workplace you're working in. You get it through information. And then secondly, you got to be practical. I mean, you have to understand, what the challenges are, what the opportunities are, tackle the challenges that you can take, and the ones you can't take, put them aside, silo them a little bit. And if you hold yourself accountable to those things and reassess periodically, I think that go a long way. I think the trap that a lot of Asian Americans fall into is this trap of, I'm not getting recognized, I'm not getting the opportunity, as opposed to, what am I doing to recognize? What have I done to get the opportunities?
I just want to add on, Carol, to Sam's point. I think networking is so important. And even at the stage in our careers right now, Sam and I have been out of law school 25 years out. I just can't emphasize and re-emphasize the importance of networking. And then it's not a real network if you meet someone, you send them a LinkedIn invitation, they accept, and then you never hear from them again. A real network is always cultivating the network and trying to connect people, trying to help people without expectation, anything in return. And I'll give you an example. I used to work with an executive of a very large company, and for 7 or 8 years, he was very successful at the company. All he did was work internally. When executive recruiters called him up, for example, he never returned their calls. And what happens? At the end of the 7 or 8 years, then there were a couple of not so great years, and now he's out of a job. And for him now, even though he's very experienced, terrific executive with sterling credentials, now for him to call back these executive recruiters and then other people he may not have returned calls with in the industry, his other friends, I mean, who's going to help him now that, he had a very successful run 8 or 9 years at this large company, but he never bothered to fall back to other people. I think that's the biggest mistake. And you always really have to try to cultivate your network and then take leadership positions in organizations that you join, to Sam's point.
Absolutely. That's great advice. I just want to thank all of our panelists here again for this discussion. And in lieu of time, I'm going to kick it back to Lane. I don't know if we have for maybe one question that might have come in from our audience, but I'll turn it over to you, Lane.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. Yeah, we have time for one last question. So if each of you could speak to this, that would be great. The question is, how do you build solidarity with other people of color in your professional workplace?
I can say quick, you got to take the initiative. You got to reach out. You got to build bridges. Don't sit there expecting other people to reach out to you or build bridges with you necessarily. You got to get out of your comfort zone. You got to reach out. You got to meet people and develop those relationships. And those relationships don't develop overnight or even days or weeks. I mean, they are long-term efforts. We're talking months and years. And that's how you do it. And it's interesting. The more you do it, I think the more enjoyable it gets. And it's sort of interesting how many other people that you can connect to as well.
Yeah, another great example was when I arrived in Atlanta from the DC area in 2014. I remember going to the first Georgia Asian Pacific American Bar Association gala, sitting at Sam's table. There were 90 people, and I was the only general counsel in the room. So I looked over at Sam. I said, I need to join the board and make sure that we raise the profile of GAPABA. So I joined the board the following year, 2015, and we've increased membership every year by building bridges to other organizations. Our last 2 galas, we had 500 people, 40 to 50 general counsel, every major law firm, many public officials and judges that attend our annual gala. And it's because we build bridges to the Hispanic Bar Association, the Black Lawyers Association, Stonewall Association for LGBTQ. And it was really making sure that we worked hard in raising the visibility and then building bridges to other affinity organizations.
Yeah, I don't know with a lot of other companies, but if there is an ERG or some sort of a, racial specific employee group that you can join, I would also encourage doing that and, networking with across different ERGs. So not just the Asian ERG, but also reaching out to the Black and Hispanic groups. It's very much that way in journalism where the minority journalists, there's still so few of us that we all pretty much have to band together. And in our newsroom, when there are issues that affect the Black journalists or the Hispanic journalists, we all kind of talk together and have joint events, just happy hours. We have, we communicate constantly on Slack. And of course, with the outside journalism organizations, we all work together very closely. And I think allyship, partnership, that's the kind of stuff that each relationship builds on, one after another. And I completely echo what Sam and Michael said, reach out, take initiative, try to connect with different communities, especially during the time when it matters. I'm very heartened that during this time when COVID is just affecting, especially Asian Americans in a very personal and acute way, the NAACP and other civic rights organizations have also reached out to Asian groups and the Asian American Journalists Association to ask, how can we help you during this time? The Committee to Protect Journalists, which is all about press freedom and press protection around the world, they've reached out as well. And I think these are key moments where we could have conversations about shared experiences, not because we're Asian, but because of being minorities in this country and how we can connect over these very key moments in our history.
I agree with everybody. Building relationships is key. And I think many of us grow up thinking that relationships are not necessarily as important. We just need to focus on the work in front of us. But relationships are really the building blocks of coalition building. Thank you so much. I just want to echo my thanks to Sam Choi, Jane Yang, Michael Wu, Carol So, and Michelle Lee for participating in today's wonderful conversation.
I'm going to launch a really quick poll for everyone who's attending. We just want to know if this was of interest to you and helpful. We'd love to get any feedback on future digital webinars to bring to you and make it as meaningful as possible. Thank you so much for everyone who was able to attend. We're also going to be sending out a little bit of information on our Momentum page talking about some of the diversity work that Emory is involved in. With that, I'm going to bid you all a happy day and thank you for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.